When a thug shoved a single mom to the ground at a quiet diner, he thought he could get away with it, until he heard the sound of chairs scraping and boots hitting the floor from the back of the restaurant. 4 bikers rose from their booth, their eyes locked on him, and the entire diner went silent. But what happened next? Would these leather-clad strangers restore justice? Or would this mother learn the hard way that no one was coming to save her? The chrome-edged diner sits at the corner of Main and Fifth, like it's been there since the beginning of time, its neon sign flickering in the late afternoon light with that familiar electric buzz that feels like the heartbeat of small-town America. Inside, the air is thick with the smell of fresh coffee brewing, bacon sizzling on the griddle, and the faint sweetness of apple pie cooling on the counter. The black and white checkered floor gleams under fluorescent lights, and red vinyl booths line the windows, their surfaces split and patched from years of use. The jukebox in the corner plays something low and bluesy, the kind of music that wraps around you like an old blanket. This place has witnessed 1,000 ordinary moments, first dates and last goodbyes, celebration breakfasts and lonely midnight coffees, and today feels like it should be just another one of those unremarkable afternoons where nothing much happens and time moves slow as honey. Sarah sits in the corner booth by the window, the one that's become hers by default over the past 6 months since she started working double shifts. Her waitress uniform from her morning shift at the truck stop is still on under her jacket. She can smell the grease and coffee that's soaked into the fabric no matter how many times she washes it. Her hands are wrapped around a white ceramic mug, the warmth seeping into her palms, and she watches the steam rise in delicate spirals. Across from her, her 6-year-old sits with a box of crayons spread across the table, coloring a paper placemat with intense concentration, her tongue poking out slightly between her lips the way she does when she's focused. The 6-year-old's hair falls forward like a curtain of gold, and every few minutes the child looks up at her mother with eyes that shine with pure, uncomplicated love. This 20-minute window between Sarah's shifts is sacred. It's when she gets to be just mom, not worker or debtor or survivor, just the person who matters most to this small human who believes she can fix anything. The tip jar sitting on their kitchen counter at home has exactly $43 in it, and rent is due in 5 days. Sarah did the math this morning while brushing her teeth, calculated it again while driving to work, and the numbers don't lie. She's short, again. The landlord's been patient, but patience has limits, and she's felt those limits narrowing like walls closing in. But here, in this moment, watching her color a smiling sun in the corner of her drawing, Sarah lets herself pretend that everything is fine. She reaches across the table and tucks a strand of hair behind the child's ear, and she beams at her. "Mama, look, I made you a rainbow," she says, holding up the placemat. And Sarah feels her throat tighten with the kind of love that's both beautiful and terrifying because it makes you vulnerable in ways you never knew existed. The bell above the door jangles, sharp and sudden, and the atmosphere shifts. A man walks in, and somehow the light seems to dim around him, as if he carries his own shadow. He's tall, broad-shouldered, with tattoos crawling up his neck in dark, aggressive patterns. Serpents and skulls and words in Gothic script that speak of violence and territory. His leather jacket is scuffed and stained, hanging open over a black t-shirt that's seen better days. His boots are heavy, steel-toed, the kind that make a statement with every step. But it's his eyes that make Sarah's stomach tighten. They're flat and cold. Scanning the restaurant with the calculated assessment of a predator evaluating prey. She's seen that look before. She saw it in the face of her daughter's father before he walked out, leaving nothing but empty promises and unpaid bills. She's seen it in the faces of men who think single mothers are easy targets, broken things to be used and discarded. The man slides into a booth near the counter, his movements deliberate and entitled. He spreads out like he owns the place, one arm draped over the back of the seat, his legs extended into the aisle. When the waitress approaches, a woman Sarah recognizes from church, someone who works here to help pay for her community college classes. He doesn't look at her face. He just snaps his fingers, a sharp crack of sound that makes several diners glance up. "Coffee, black, and make it fast," he says, his voice carrying that edge of barely controlled aggression that makes everyone in the room unconsciously adjust their posture, shrinking slightly. The server nods, her smile professional but tight, and Sarah sees the familiar flash of discomfort in her eyes. That look women get when they're trying to be polite to someone who doesn't deserve their courtesy. Sarah pulls the child a little closer, her hand finding the small one across the table and holding tight. Her thumb traces gentle circles on the child's palm, a gesture so automatic she doesn't even think about it anymore. It's just what she does when the world feels sharp and unpredictable. She looks up, sensing the shift in her mother's energy. "Mama?" she asks, and Sarah forces a smile. "It's okay, baby. Keep coloring. Show me what else you're going to draw." But her eyes don't leave the man in the booth, and something ancient and instinctive in her gut whispers warnings. This is the feeling she's learned to trust, the one that's kept them safe in parking garages and dark streets, the internal alarm that screams danger when dangerous men enter the room. The woman returns with the coffee pot, moving carefully through the narrow aisle between tables. The place is busy enough that navigation requires attention, and she's balancing a water pitcher in her other hand. Sarah witnesses it as if in slow motion. The server reaching across to refill the man's cup, her body angled awkwardly, and then someone at the adjacent table shifts, bumping their chair back slightly. It's just a small jostle, barely anything. But it's enough. The waitress stumbles half a step, her hand jerks, and a few drops of hot coffee splash onto the table, a tiny amount catching the edge of the man's sleeve. For a heartbeat, the cafe holds its breath. The jukebox continues playing. The griddle continues sizzling. But everyone within sight of that booth has stopped moving, forks frozen halfway to mouths, conversations dying mid-sentence. The man's face transforms, rage blooming across his features like a dark flower opening. "You stupid!" he starts, the word hanging in the air, ugly and violent, and before the server can apologize or step back or do anything at all, his hand shoots out and grabs her wrist. His fingers wrap around it like a vice, knuckles white with pressure, and he twists. She cries out, a sharp sound of pain and surprise that cuts through the restaurant like broken glass. Her water pitcher hits the floor with a crash, water spreading across the checkered tiles, and she tries to pull away, but he holds on, his grip tightening. "You think you can just throw coffee on me? Do you have any idea who I am?" His voice is rising, drawing attention from every corner of the room, and she catches the fear in the server's eyes, that awful recognition that she's trapped, that this man could hurt her, and there's nothing she can do about it. Something snaps inside Sarah. She doesn't think thinking would mean acknowledging the risk, calculating the danger, remembering that she's 5'4" and 120 pounds, and this man could break her in half without effort. Thinking would mean staying in her seat, keeping her head down, protecting herself and the child by not getting involved. But her body moves before her brain catches up, propelled by something older than logic, some primal fury that ignites when you watch someone abuse power over someone who can't fight back. She's on her feet, her chair scraping loudly against the floor, and she hears herself say, "Let her go." Her voice shakes, but it's steady enough, loud enough, and the man's head swivels toward her like a predator noticing movement in his peripheral vision. He releases the server's wrist with a small shove that sends her stumbling backward, and now his full attention is on Sarah. His smile is all teeth and malice, the expression of someone who enjoys this, who feeds on fear and submission. "Or what?" he says, standing up slowly, deliberately, unfolding to his full height. He's easily 6'2", maybe 6'3", with the build of someone who's spent time either in a gym or in prison or both. "You gonna do something about it, sweetheart? You and your little brat over there?" The words hit Sarah like a physical blow, and she hears the little girl make a small, frightened sound behind her. Every instinct screams at her to back down, to apologize, to make herself small and unthreatening. But she takes another step forward instead, positioning herself between the man and the waitress, between him and the child, her body becoming a shield even though she knows how inadequate it is. "She didn't mean to spill anything. It was an accident. There's no reason to—" Sarah starts, but she doesn't get to finish. The man moves fast, covering the distance between them in 2 strides, and his hand comes up and connects with her shoulder. Not a punch exactly, but a hard, contemptuous shove that catches her off balance. She stumbles backward, her hip striking hard against the edge of a table, with a burst of pain that steals her breath. And then she's falling, her hand reaching out for purchase and finding nothing but air. She hits the floor hard, her elbow taking most of the impact, sending a shock of pain up her arm. The ceiling tiles swim above her, and for a moment she can't quite process what just happened. Then she hears it, the child's scream. It's a sound Sarah has heard before, in nightmares and in the hospital, when the little girl was born, and they weren't sure she was breathing. A sound that bypasses every other sensation and goes straight to the core of her being. She pushes herself up on her elbow, tasting blood where she bit her lip, and sees the little girl standing now. Tears streaming down her face, hands pressed against her mouth. The man is taking another step forward, his face twisted with anger, and Sarah realizes with crystalline, terrible clarity that this is the moment everything could shatter. This is when the child learns that the world is cruel and mothers can't always protect you. This is when the thin membrane of safety she's tried so hard to maintain tears irreparably. Her mind races through scenarios, each one worse than the last. She could grab the child and run, but her side is screaming, and she's not sure she can move fast enough. She could scream for help, but who would risk getting involved with someone like this? The other diners are frozen, trapped in that awful space between wanting to help and being too afraid to act. The young worker is backed against the counter, one hand pressed to her mouth. Sarah tries to stand, her legs shaking, and the man towers over her. "You should have minded your own business," he says, and there's a quality to his tone now, a dark pleasure, like he's been waiting for an excuse to do this, like she's just given him permission to unleash something he's been holding back. She thinks about the $43 in the tip jar. She thinks about the rent due in 5 days. She thinks about every morning she's woken up at 4 a.m. to get to her first shift. Every night she's cried silently in the bathroom so the child wouldn't hear. Every single moment she's fought to build something resembling a life from the wreckage of her past. She thinks about how unfair it is that trying to help someone could cost her everything. That standing up against bullying could end with her in the hospital, or worse, leaving the little girl alone and unprotected. The man's fist is clenching, his weight shifting forward, and Sarah closes her eyes for just a second, pulling together every scrap of courage she has left, preparing to fight back even though she knows it's useless. And then she hears it, a sound that changes everything, the scrape of chairs against linoleum, heavy and deliberate. The sound of boots, multiple pairs, moving in unison with purposeful weight. From the back of the restaurant, from a booth Sarah hadn't paid much attention to when she walked in. And suddenly the entire atmosphere of the room shifts like the air pressure dropping before a storm. 4 figures rise from the red vinyl seats, and they rise like mountains forming from the earth itself. Massive and solid and absolutely commanding. They're bikers. That much is immediately clear from the leather vests adorned with patches and pins, from the worn denim and heavy boots, from the way they carry themselves with the confidence of people who've ridden 10,000 miles and seen things that would break ordinary men. The biggest one stands at least 6'4", with shoulders that seem to fill half the aisle, and a gray beard that falls halfway down his chest. His eyes are blue steel, the kind of eyes that have witnessed real violence and understand exactly when and how to deploy it. He moves first, his boots striking the black and white tiles with deliberate measured steps, and the sound is like thunder rolling across the plains. The other 3 follow. Another man with a shaved head and forearms covered in intricate tattoos that tell stories in ink. A third who's leaner, but no less intimidating, with a scar running down the side of his face. And a woman with silver hair pulled back in a tight braid and arms that look like they could bend steel. They don't rush. They don't need to. Their presence alone is enough to change the molecular composition of the room, to make everyone suddenly aware that the power dynamic has shifted completely. The thug who was looming over Sarah freezes mid-motion, his fist still clenched, his body language screaming aggression, but now there's something else creeping into his expression, the first flicker of uncertainty, the dawning realization that he's miscalculated badly. The veteran positions himself between Sarah and the thug with the kind of economy of movement that speaks to lifetimes of knowing exactly where his body is in space. He doesn't touch anyone, doesn't make any overtly threatening gestures, but somehow he fills the space so completely that the thug has to take a step back just to maintain his personal bubble. "I think you need to leave," the leader says, and his voice is low and calm, barely above conversational volume, but it carries the weight of absolute authority. It's not a suggestion or a request. It's a statement of fact about what's going to happen next, and everyone in the room knows it. The jukebox seems to have gone silent, or maybe Sarah just can't hear it anymore over the rushing of blood in her ears. She's still on the floor, where she'd struck the table, still throbbing. Her elbow scraped and bleeding slightly, but she can't look away from what's unfolding. The thug tries to rally, tries to reclaim some of his swagger. "This is none of your business, old man. The bitch came at me." He doesn't get to finish the sentence because the veteran takes one step closer, closing the distance to about 18 inches, and suddenly the thug can see exactly what he's dealing with. Up close, the biker's knuckles are scarred and misshapen from old fights. His face is weathered from years on the road in all conditions, and his eyes hold something that makes the thug's throat work nervously. This isn't some weekend warrior who bought his leather vest at a mall. This is someone who's earned every patch and pin, who's lived a life where respect is currency and disrespect has consequences. "She didn't come at you," the tall rider says, his voice still quiet, but now edged with something sharp. "We were sitting back there watching you from the moment you walked in. Saw you disrespect the waitress, saw you snap your fingers at her like she's a dog, saw you grab her wrist and hurt her, and then we watched you shove this mother to the ground in front of her child." He pauses, letting each word land like a hammer strike. "So, here's what's going to happen now. You're going to apologize to all three of them, the waitress, the mother, and the little girl you just traumatized. You're going to do it sincerely, and then you're going to walk out that door and keep walking, and you're never going to come back to this town. Or," and now his voice drops even lower, becomes almost intimate, like he's sharing a secret. "We're going to have a very different kind of conversation outside in the parking lot, and I promise you, you won't enjoy how it ends." The woman with the silver braid has moved to Sarah's side, kneeling down on the wet floor without seeming to care about her jeans getting soaked. Her hands are gentle as she helps Sarah sit up, checking her over with the practiced eye of someone who's administered first aid more times than she can count. "You okay, hun?" she asks, and her voice is surprisingly soft, maternal even, completely at odds with her intimidating appearance. "Nothing broken?" Sarah shakes her head, not quite trusting her voice yet, and the woman helps her to her feet with a steadying hand under her elbow. The little girl rushes forward, wrapping her arms around her mother's waist, and Sarah holds her tight, feeling the little body shaking with sobs. The thug is looking around now, and what he sees must not reassure him. Every person in the place is staring at him, with expressions ranging from disgust to barely concealed hostility. The cook has come out from the kitchen, wiping his hands on his apron, his face set in hard lines. The elderly couple in the booth by the door are glaring at him with the kind of righteous anger that only grandparents can muster when children are threatened. Even the teenage busboy has stopped pretending to work and is watching with his arms crossed. The thug has gone from predator to prey in the space of 2 minutes, and he knows it. His bravado is crumbling like cheap drywall, leaving behind just a man who picked the wrong target in the wrong place. "I said," the leader prompts, and there's steel in his voice now, the kind that says his patience is a finite resource, and it's running out fast. The other bikers have positioned themselves strategically around the space, not threatening exactly, but creating a human barrier between the thug and any exit except the front door. The bald one cracks his knuckles, a sound like branches snapping. The scarred one just stares, unblinking, and somehow that's more unsettling than any overt threat could be. "Sorry," the thug mumbles, looking at his boots. His voice has lost all its edge, deflated and hollow. "What was that?" the veteran asks. "Couldn't quite hear you. I think the ladies deserve better than that." The thug's jaw works, and the internal struggle plays across his face. Pride versus self-preservation. Ego versus survival instinct. Survival wins. He looks up, not quite meeting anyone's eyes, and says louder, "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have. I'm sorry." It's barely adequate, the kind of apology a child gives when forced, but the tall rider nods slowly. "Now get out," he says simply. The thug doesn't need to be told twice. He practically runs for the door, his boots slipping slightly on the wet floor, and the bell jangles again as he bursts out into the parking lot. Through the window, she watches him sprint to a beat-up pickup truck, fumble with his keys, and peel out of the lot with squealing tires and a spray of gravel. The tension in the room breaks like a fever, and suddenly everyone is exhaling, talking, moving again. The waitress is crying, being comforted by the cook. The elderly couple are nodding approvingly at the bikers, but Sarah is frozen, holding the child, trying to process what just happened, trying to understand how a moment that seemed destined to end in violence and trauma somehow transformed into something else entirely. The veteran turns to face Sarah fully now, and up close she can see the details she missed before, the laugh lines around his eyes, the military insignia patch on his vest that reads Vietnam Veteran, the small photograph pinned near his heart of what looks like a young woman and a child. His face softens as he looks at the child, who's peeking out from behind Sarah's legs with dark red puffy eyes. "Hey there, little one," he says gently, his voice completely different now, warm and kind. "That was pretty scary, wasn't it?" The little girl nods, and he crouches down slowly, making himself smaller, less intimidating. "You know what, though? Your mama is one of the bravest people I've seen in a long time. She stood up to protect someone who needed help, even though she was scared. That's what real heroes do." Sarah feels tears prickling at her eyes, the adrenaline crash hitting her all at once. Her legs are shaking. The injury is going to leave a massive bruise, and she can feel the scrape on her elbow burning. But more than the physical pain, she's overwhelmed by the emotional weight of it all. The fear, the helplessness, the awful vulnerability of being on that floor, and then the sudden, miraculous intervention of these strangers who owed her nothing but gave her everything. "Thank you," she manages to whisper, and it feels completely inadequate, like trying to describe the ocean with a single word. The leader stands back up, his knees creaking slightly, and he waves off her gratitude. "Nothing to thank us for. We take care of our own." "But I'm not," Sarah starts, confused, and he smiles. "Sure you are. You're part of this town, this community. That makes you family." He glances back at his companions, who've started settling back toward their booth, giving Sarah and the child some space. The silver-haired woman squeezes Sarah's shoulder once before walking away. The other bikers nod respectfully, their expressions making it clear that this is just what they do, no big deal, nothing worth making a fuss over. The veteran, Sarah realizes she doesn't even know his name, but somehow it doesn't seem to matter, pulls out a worn leather wallet from his back pocket. The leather is worn and faded, probably generations old, and she can see photos peeking out from behind plastic sleeves. He opens it slowly, deliberately, and extracts 2 crisp $50 bills, the kind that look like they were withdrawn from a bank that morning, specifically for this purpose. Like, maybe he always keeps emergency cash on hand for moments exactly like this. He tucks them under Sarah's coffee mug, which still sits on the table where she left it, the coffee long since gone cold. "We've all got people we love," he says quietly, and his words carry a depth of experience and loss that speaks to a life fully lived. And sometimes the world forgets to take care of the ones who take care of everyone else. Sarah looks down at the money, and the tears that have been threatening finally spill over. $100. It's not enough to solve all her problems. The rent will still be a challenge. The bills will still pile up. Tomorrow, she'll still have to wake up at 4 a.m. and do it all over again. But right now, in this moment, it represents something far more valuable than its face value. It represents being seen, being valued, being protected by people who don't know her story, but recognize her struggle because they've fought their own battles and understand what it means to survive against the odds. Her throat is too tight to speak, so she just nods, pressing one hand to her mouth, and the biker seems to understand. He reaches out and gently touches the child's hair, just once, a gesture that's somehow both paternal and reverent. "You take care of your mama, okay?" he tells the little girl. "She's special." Then he's walking back to his booth, where the other bikers are already settling in, and Sarah watches through blurry eyes as they resume their conversation like nothing extraordinary just happened. The server comes over, her own eyes red-rimmed, and refills Sarah's coffee without being asked. "On the house," she says, "for both of you. And thank you. You didn't have to do that." Sarah shakes her head. "Yes, I did," she says, "because it's true. She couldn't have lived with herself if she'd stayed silent, even though standing up almost cost her more than she could afford to lose." She slides back into the booth, pulling the little girl onto her lap, and holds her close. The little girl's face is buried in her mother's neck, and Sarah can feel the warm dampness of tears and breath against her skin. She rocks slightly, unconsciously, the way she has since her daughter was an infant, and gradually the shaking subsides. "Mama?" the little girl asks after a while, her voice small and muffled. "Yeah, baby? Those were good guys, right?" even though they looked scary. Sarah glances over at the booth in the back, where the four bikers are eating pie and drinking coffee, their laughter rumbling low and genuine. The veteran catches her looking and raises his mug slightly in a silent toast, and she returns the gesture. "Yeah, baby," Sarah says, smoothing the child's hair back from her face, memorizing this moment because she knows it will become one of those stories they tell years from now, one of those defining experiences that shapes how the child sees the world. Those were good guys. Sometimes the people who look the toughest on the outside have the biggest hearts on the inside. Sometimes help comes from places you don't expect. She thinks about the $100 under her coffee mug, about the way the silver-haired woman's hands were so gentle despite looking like they could snap bones, about the quiet authority in the veteran's voice that made a violent man retreat without a single punch being thrown. Beyond the glass, she can see their motorcycles lined up in the parking lot, chrome gleaming in the late afternoon sun, each one a piece of art and machinery that represents freedom and brotherhood and the open road. She thinks about how she's always been afraid of people like that, how she's crossed streets and locked car doors when she's seen leather vests and tattoos, how she's made assumptions based on appearance. But today she learned that strength comes in unexpected forms, that heroes don't always look like the ones in movies, that sometimes the scariest-looking people are the ones who step up when everyone else steps back. The neon sign outside continues its electric buzz, the same rhythm it's maintained for decades. The jukebox kicks into a new song, something about home and belonging. The cook goes back to his griddle, and the ordinary rhythm of the diner reasserts itself. But nothing is quite the same. Sarah feels something shifting inside her chest, that knot of fear and exhaustion that's been her constant companion for so long finally starting to loosen. Not disappearing. She's not naive enough to think one act of kindness erases all her struggles, but loosening enough that she can take a deeper breath than she has in months. The child picks up her crayons again, returns to her placemat, and starts adding to her drawing. This time she draws 4 figures on motorcycles, big and protective, surrounding the stick figure woman and child. "That's us," she explains, pointing, "and that's them, making sure we're safe." Sarah kisses the top of her head, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo, and watches as the bikers finish their meal, leave cash on the table, and walk out together. They mount their motorcycles with practiced ease, the engines roaring to life with that distinctive rumble that sounds like controlled thunder. They ride out in formation, not looking back, just 4 people continuing their journey, leaving behind a single mother and her daughter, who will carry this day with them forever, not as the time they were knocked down, but as the moment they learned that protection can come from the most unexpected places, that standing up for what's right matters even when it's terrifying, and that sometimes, when you're at your most vulnerable, strangers become angels on motorcycles who remind you that you're not alone in this world after all.